Word Nerds! Happy Saturday! It is August 15th, 2015. This is Erica's voice, if you cannot tell by the picture on your screen or couldn't take an educated guess. It's alright, it's me! You get my lovely voice today. Today I'm going to be teaching you about how I did my covers for Mostly Marceline and Lovely Dark and Deep, which are the two titles up for Pick Your Pages. Right now you can vote to decide which book I write next, Mostly Marceline and Lovely Dark and Deep. The first chapters are up on Wattpad and my blog. You can find it all there. You can read the chapters, the synopsis, and obviously you can see the covers because you're seeing them right now. How great is that? We're going to start with Mostly Marceline, and trust me, this is much easier than it looks. I know you might be looking at this and the sidebar over here and thinking, well, crap on a cracker. Trust me, I'm not really skilled in all things graphics. It just really takes an eye for knowing genres and figuring out how to work with the pictures that you are using for your cover. Mostly Marceline is a new adult contemporary romance. Hopefully you kind of get that with the image. Genre is important to tell in a cover. So this is the final product, but let us go back through time and just erase everything and start from base. Whoop, went too far. This was the original image that I had for Mostly Marceline. The image itself is actually a little bit wider than the cover. Normally when I go to design a cover, I look for images that are vertical so that they will fill up the entire space. But this one, look at it. I couldn't pass up on this. Look at this. She's in a grocery cart. She's eating ice cream. I like her shoes. It's great. I went with this, and then I had the dilemma of how to fill this blank space above the image because, you kind of need the rest of a cover for this to work. To solve the dilemma of it being horizontal instead of vertical, I was going to stretch the image to make it fit vertically, but that cut off her legs and part of the grocery cart, and I just didn't like the way it looked. It also made me question where the title was going to go or where I'd put my name. Instead, I went over here and I decided to copy parts of the wall and then replicate it. So I'd copy it and paste it. Copy it, paste it. Copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, all the way until the entire image was filled. Now, it looks pretty seamless, which took a lot of zooming in super close and making sure that the bricks and everything lined up correctly. And then when you zoom out, look at it, not a problem. So what I did next is I added 2 gradients to boost the color because it was a little washed out, a little too bright. I like my covers usually more contrasted. I went to layer, new layer, gradient. And when you go to gradient, you can choose different ways to add color. I can pull it all the way up, I can pull it farther down. You can have it linear, radial style, reversed or otherwise. So if I just wanted a spotlight on Marceline, I could have done that. Angle, which I don't know why anybody would use. Reflected, which again, that or reversed. Or diamond. And then after I use gradient, I can go in and change it to a different kind of setting other than normal. So normal was always a little too dark, and because I wanted to boost the color and the contrast, I went for overlay, adjusted the fill down to 30% so it wasn't as dark, and did that twice. Then I wanted to address the issue of the bricks that I'd mentioned before. So I thought the best way to do that was to just draw a rectangle over it and bring more focus to the title. The original square I did was yellow because I thought I was going to use the color of her ice cream in the title itself. I didn't like that in the end. Blue and yellow is fine, but it wasn't working for me. So I overlaid the color of red, which was closer because I wanted to focus on her nails at that point, picking out small details and colors from the image itself to pull from. I didn't like how red it was, and I know that sounds crazy because I chose the color red, so hear me out on this. I wanted a nice contrast between the blue and the whatever color the title was going to be over the rectangle. Red was close, but not quite there. I ended up overlaying this purple color to make it a little bit more pinkish raspberry color, which I love raspberry, so let's just go with raspberry. To do that, I went to layer, new fill layer, solid color, and I picked that purple. I chose, instead of going normal, which would have looked crazy, I chose lighten, which is a different way of overlaying the image color. It actually overlays the entire image, not just the rectangle, so it adds a little of a purple hue to Marceline, or the model who's playing Marceline. Adjusted how visible I wanted it, 50% fill, 60%, and then it was time to lay in the titles. Start with the author name. Now, author name is really important on a book cover because, well, it's kind of important to know who wrote the frickin' book, right? Placement for this and size is important. You want to make sure that it's readable even at a small thumbnail because that's probably how you're going to see it on Amazon. I wanted it to be white, pick up on the sneakers, good contrast against the blue, and I decided to put it above at the top of the cover instead of below because if I put it below, it would cut off some of the grocery cart, and this is what I have of Marceline. So I didn't want to block her at all. Besides, all I have at the top is just more blue bricks, so why not just put it there? Then it's time for the actual title itself. Mostly Marceline is a story about a new adult age character who mostly has her life together. So mostly was going to be the emphasis of the title. She's mostly Marceline. She mostly knows what she's doing. So I made that really big and made it black. Added some drop shadows to it, which looks like that. And then I added Marceline, which is actually in the same font as my author name is, and put it in white to add that contrast because I just thought it looked nice and I liked it. And I added another drop shadow, which, does a little bit of something extra. And that is the cover of Mostly Marceline. Really not too complicated at all. I just copied the bricks all the way up, added a rectangle, messed with the color, a bunch of overlays of gradient. I only used three gradients, 2 black gradients and 1 white gradient to kind of brighten up down here. Then 1 color fill of this purple color, which again, without it, looks like this, which I guess is fine, but that red looks a little harsh, so I like that better. And there you have it. On to Lovely Dark and Deep. Lovely Dark and Deep is a new adult dark fantasy, emphasis on the dark. The cover immediately looks much different than Mostly Marceline. Let's look at them kind of next to each other. Mostly Marceline's a lot brighter, it looks more fun and funny, which is good because that's what I want for the book. And Lovely Dark and Deep, you can see that there's woods. Dark, let's just say it's really dark in comparison. Let's go back in time to see where this image started. Alright, here is the original image of the Lovely Dark and Deep cover. As soon as I realized that this would be perfect for Lovely Dark and Deep, I knew it had to be much darker. This image is nice, but it's way too bright, especially since Lovely Dark and Deep will take place primarily at nighttime. Nothing about it looks ominous. This just looks like a girl in the woods in the spring, which, what's scary about that? First thing I did, I went to Image, Adjustments, and I upped the vibrancy and the hue and saturation. Then what I did next is actually a safer way to go if you're trying to alter the way an image looks. I went to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. You can adjust brightness, contrast levels, exposure, curves, vibrance, hue, saturation, color balance, blah, 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 etc. Brightness, contrast. And I did not make it any brighter, obviously. I just dulled the contrast. And then I went to Vibrancy, and I upped the vibrance to +20 and downed the saturation to -18. The colors that are there are more vibrant, but I kind of wanted it to be a little bit more washed out, and it made it a little bit more gray. And I know that the first layer I did upped the color and everything, but this is starting to make it look a little bit darker and less like daytime. Here comes the fun part. Look on the right side of my page. You will see that there is layer after layer after layer after layer of gradients and color fills and all that fun stuff. New fill layer, solid color, gradients. I never use pattern, but these two I bounce between until I get it exactly right. As you can see, with Lovely Dark and Deep, I have 16 different layers of colors and gradients. This is me just kind of fidgeting with it until it starts to look more like I want it to. And I play around with the different shapes, as you saw, like linear. I'll do reflected around the character, or I'll do the diamond if I want to highlight one specific part. The first one is an overlay at 50% and 30% fill, and this is just black and white. And it's reflected, and if you can see, it's around the character itself. The sides get a little bit darker, and there's a bar of white over her. Now, obviously, it's still too bright to be nighttime, but just give me a minute. I added another layer of soft light at 50%, of darkness to go over here. You can see it gets a little bit darker. Now comes the colors. Fill color of this dark purple, lighten at 50%. Fill color of this dark blue, vivid light at 20%. Fill color of this light blue, screening it, 63% with 28% fill. A gradient of this dark color, again, I think it's either a dark blue or a black, again, to go around her. This one's in a diamond pattern so that it's putting more focus on her, darker in the corners. Gradient, this one's overlay at 50 and then 33% fill. A gradient of this brownish color that I picked from amongst the trees behind her. That's overlay at 100%. And this is the one that's going to really make the difference. Hold on to your butts. This is a fill color of this dark forest green, which I probably picked from among the grass down here. And boom. Now we've got more green. It's really, really, really dark. This was actually originally how I had just left it. But for me, I didn't like quite how vibrant it was. It also still kind of looked too bright and not quite enough like it was nighttime. I needed to add, and this is at overlay 100% by the way, I needed to add just a few more layers of this foresty green that I chose again from behind her. This mint color fill, which makes her look much more blue and green, which kind of makes it look more like nighttime as opposed to daytime, because daytime's more gold, nighttime is more blues and silvers. I added a red overlay because, you know. Gradient, 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 and there is the nighttime image of Azel in the woods of Lovely Dark and Deep. This is the final image I had for Lovely Dark and Deep after I added all of my layers in. Looks a little bit more like it's nighttime, or at least like it's getting close to nighttime. It also adds a darker, creepier tone to the forest, which otherwise looked really cheerful. Too cheerful for what happens in this book. Now after this, my image is done, I have to think about font placement and where the title's gonna go, where my name's gonna go, and for this one I actually wanted a tagline on the front. Author name goes at the ground as opposed to Marceline, which was above, because if I put it above her with how big I need the author name to be visible at this tiny thumbnail of the image, it was going to cut off a fair amount of her head. The color for the author name needed to be bright so it could be seen against the dark grass. I actually chose the color by using the color select tool and just picking it out from her dress or her skin. Then I have the tagline above her. The tagline is a smaller font, so it didn't need to be below her, and it really doesn't cut off her head, and it kind of draws your eye up too, so it's a nice balance. Taglines, you want to make sure if you're putting them on the front cover that they're intriguing enough for someone to kind of start questioning what it means and want to pick up the book to find out what it means. You also want to make sure that they're short enough and it doesn't take up like a paragraph over. Then finally, the title itself, Lovely, Dark, and Deep. I wanted whatever cover for Lovely, Dark, and Deep to be a typography cover where the title was kind of the main focus. Now for Lovely, Dark, and Deep, I wanted it to be a little bit more ornate than the font and the typography for Mostly Marceline, and I also wanted it to be a little bit creepy. So I chose this rugged cursive, I guess you'd call it. It's thick, it's a little bit gnarled, and I thought it worked, well, I thought it worked really well. I also wanted to make sure that it was big enough to not look puny on the cover, because again, you want to be able to see it from far away. I had to outline the image, which I just do through stroke, and I chose this color from beyond the image, put it on screen, and multiplied the cover so that it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4 times written, so that the shadow that drops from the title is visible, and so is the stroke for the outline is bright enough that you can see it against the darkness, because think about how much I miss the title from the sides of really dark. And that's the cover of Lovely Dark and Deep. Again, not too complicated. All I did was messed around with the brightness and vibrancy, added a bunch of new layers of gradients and then fill colors, put up the font, and then it's done. So that's how I make my covers, more or less. I think that gives you a pretty good idea of how I work. It usually takes, if I have an image, it'll take me about an hour or 2 tops to finish a cover, but I will tell you that searching for the right image can take days and days and days, and that's really the hardest part of it. I hope you guys like this little tiny tutorial. I bet it's not tiny, I bet it's longer than I expected, but you know, hopefully you learned something. If you haven't already voted for Pick Your Pages, make sure to do that, because it's a really close race right now, and if you want to make sure that the book you want to read most actually gets written first, you gotta vote. I love you, nerds, and I will see you Sunday.